We went away for a fateful weekend to this bed and breakfast in the Berkshires. And we said, we're not going to come back until we figure out what we want to do that makes us want to get out of bed each day. And it very quickly centered around children because we both love children. Our parents were all involved in education in some way. But we knew somehow if we could impact children, not only would it make us feel a profound sense of, joy and gratitude for what we did, that it would be something that can stand the test of time because children weren't going away. And we knew if we're going to do something and leave our mark on the world in a small way, let it be with children.
Today, we're going to talk about a woman who actually is the epitome of doing it and having it all. Don't start screaming, you can't have it all. Well, she's done it all. And as you know, I work with entrepreneurial couples and I help them have it all too. So let me welcome today's podcast guest, Melissa Bernstein, who is one of the co-founders of Melissa and Doug. And they started out with a toy store, and we'll talk a little bit about how they pivoted. Welcome, Melissa.
I am so excited and honored to be here. Yay.
Great. So I just saw the dog go by. So if anyone thinks this is a virtual screen, which I thought, it's not because the dog just went running by. Okay. So Melissa, I love to talk to successful women that have had it all. You have how many children?
6.
How many?
6.
6. And one marriage?
1 marriage, 6 C-sections.
6 C-sections. See, there you go. You can have it all. All right. So what I'd like to do is, why don't we start with telling everybody what is a falsehood about having the life that you have the way you developed it? What is a myth out there that why people think they can have it all when you're clearly living it all? What's a myth? Bust it right now.
Yeah, the biggest myth is that it's going to be easy. That you feel like you're doing well at everything every day. The myth of balance, that there's any such thing called balance, because there's not. And I think there's a myth that some people feel that they can't have it all because they have this image of perfection, that to have it all means you have to do perfectly in every area of your life, which is absolutely a myth.
And quite frankly, whether you're married and have children or not, you can't do things perfectly anyway, because perfection really doesn't exist, right?
That was the hardest lesson I've had to learn. Yes.
Why? How so? How so?
Well, because, I think females, especially high achieving females, believe that we have to be perfect. And I certainly was a victim of perfectionism. And I say a victim because anyone who is a true perfectionist, to the extent I was, will suffer a devastating breakdown at some point, because we are human and humans are fallible and make mistakes and are imperfect. And very quickly, early on, I was able to sort of, maintain this illusion of perfection because I did well in school and sort of somewhat acted the part, although I never really felt it inside. But ultimately, I did fail at something that I thought I needed to be perfect at, and it triggered a breakdown.
Okay, so tell us about the breakdown. Where were you in your business and your life? What happened? And
I was in college. I was actually 19.
Where'd you go to school?
I went to Duke University.
Okay, so you're a Blue Devil?
I'm a Blue Devil, yeah. And I had fallen into 2 traps of, I think, a lot of women go through, which was I became a pleaser and a perfectionist. Because, when I was young, I was very, very overly sensitive. I was creative. I still am. And I think I experienced both really profound highs and really profound lows. And when I tried to share some of that darkness, it really wasn't well accepted by society. And I knew. So hang
on, give us a specific. People talk in those terms, perfectionism, and give us a specific example of something that you tried to share or that you did share, and it went over like a lead balloon.
Oh my gosh. Well, I was an existential nihilist who...
Okay, whoa. For the listeners out there that might not know what that means.
Probably not.
Tell it, define that.
So,
myself included. I think I know, but I'm not sure.
So I was born basically feeling an acute sensitivity to the world, so acute that the noise of the world was just so loud, and I was not able
Are
to.
you talking, Melissa, are you talking about from a sensory perspective or an
Yes,
emotional perspective?
Every aspect, hypersensitivity in all aspects,
Okay.
physical, emotional, spiritual. And that led to a very acute meaning crisis from the time I was born, basically asking, why am I here? What is the meaning of life if we're all ephemeral? And what am I meant to do while I'm here? And when I shared, and there was a lot of darkness because I questioned whether there was any meaning to life from age basically 2 on. And
Wait. I can barely remember anything about 2. You literally remember having an existential question of what's the meaning of life at 2?
well, I was very unsettled from the moment I was born and cried 24/7 for the first time.
So that must be something you were told.
I was told, but I was always very unhappy and very dark and very much about sort of wondering like what was the point of life and existence. And what happens is if you don't,
You were always searching.
I was always
searching for meaning
and thinking that others who weren't searching were just something was wrong with them, because how could you be acting like things are so great when the clock of mortality is ticking? So I was like pretty.
That's dark. That is dark.
Yeah, I was very dark, and I wrote very dark music and very dark verses from the time I was like 4 and up. And things like, the burden of myself is almost more than I can bear. Yet rather than slip further down this mountain of despair, I will simply cry for help and hope an angel hears my plea, or I won't survive much longer and succumb to misery. And I wrote that when I was.
How old were you?
5.
And you were a musician. When did you start playing music?
From the earliest, maybe 3, 4.
Were your parents musicians? So how did that develop, that talent?
Well, I heard music in my head, and I saw verses in my head. And I was at a day camp when I was maybe 4 or 5 years old, and I saw someone playing a guitar, and the sound, the vibration of their fingers on the strings literally was like a magnet cutting through my soul. And I knew at that moment I had to play the guitar. So I came home and I begged my parents, because we were very, lower middle class, we didn't have like tons of money, but I said, I have to play the guitar. I have to play the guitar. And I don't know if it was right away. I don't quite remember, but they got me a guitar, and I became basically very, very passionate about writing music and playing music.
Okay, so hang on a second.
But then it went.
So hang on a second.
Everything else.
Hang on a second. It sounds like your uber sensitivity, if you will, actually played into your ability to resonate with the music, correct? So that was like the upside of the dark side?
It was dark to begin with, but
there was something positive. Your love of music
to channel. I mean, creativity in general was a channel for the despair, but the problem was very early on, it was just darkness channeling into more darkness, because all the verses I wrote were about mortality. All the music I wrote was in minor keys and very somber, and it wasn't able to be shared with the world because it was so dark. So
what are your parents doing with this 5-year-old girl that's writing woe is me and, walking through life, holding hands with the Grim Reaper? What were your parents thinking or doing or say, like, as a parent, you would be like, what do I do with this kid?
Yeah. And I think I let maybe a bit of it out, but I remember very clearly getting the message, like, you're a child, stop thinking about those things. Like, you're supposed to be out playing. Like, you don't have to worry about death and mortality. And I remember thinking to myself, do you think I want to be worrying about this? Like I'm looking at these kids out there playing and saying, why can't I do this? Something is very wrong with me. So when I
So did
got
you not
that,
have a lot of friends growing up? Were you very lonely?
I was very lonely. Yeah. I have one brother who's special needs. That's my only sibling. And I desperately wanted great friends. And I couldn't seem to find that depth of friendship because I also very quickly would see superficiality, and sort of that duality of like people who have a spirit and should be really deep, but give off this sort of, superficiality that just
Well,
didn't.
at 5 years old, 6 years old, even 7 years old, most people just want to play in recess time. I don't think they're climbing the social ladder back then quite yet. So I'm just wondering if it was your darkness that maybe other kids are like, here comes, not aware of it, but oh, here comes doom and gloom. No room for you on the team.
I don't think so, because what I ended up doing, because I still had this deep need to be accepted and belong, and that was sort of the dichotomy of my life, was I didn't accept who I was, which was this very, now I know it's an introspective, petty, ruminating creative who feels much more comfortable in the shadows, just channeling my darkness now into light. But then I wanted to fit in so badly that what I did very quickly is I repressed all of it. I pushed it down as deeply as it could go. And I put on this persona of pleasing everyone, being completely amiable, one emotion, like everything's great. And that's where the perfectionism started to kick in, because it was, if I can't be accepted as who I am, and by the way, this was all unconscious. I wasn't,
of course,
thinking this,
of course.
but what happened, I now see, is I realized if I can't be accepted as who I am in all my, I call them, they're called overexcitabilities, these highly acute sensory issues that run through you, then I'm going to have to become what I need to be in order to be validated. And that became a pleaser that never said no, that never showed that she was tired or sick or showed any sort of physical humanness. And it was a perfectionist who never got anything wrong. And
okay, so let's fast forward. Let's fast forward to Duke. So you're in Duke with all other high achievers, and so where'd the breakdown come in?
Yeah, so I think I had pretty successfully avoided failure, through my life, because I was academic. I was a teacher's pet. I worked to get perfect. And by the way,
you were the teacher's pet without having a lot of friends. That would be pretty miserable, I would think.
Yeah, no, I used to get made fun of for being the teacher's pet because, but again, performance became my drug. And I think it was a dopamine surge that enabled me to feel okay, right? Racking up the A+s and being, at the top of the class was like,
good girl.
Really important to me. Good girl. Exactly. And I was able to do it pretty successfully through high school. But then when I got into college, everything started falling off the rails. The first was that I had thought about becoming a professional musician and left.
Oh, you were that good? You were that good?
I mean, it was a thought. And really, music was a channel to channel some of that darkness. And when I decided to not pursue that any further and go to college, I think I left something that was a lifeline in the dust and went to college with only two things as my primary goals. One was academic success and being, maybe number one there. And two was social success and finally having that group, that big, beautiful group of friends that I had always, fantasized about. So those are my only two missions at college.
But what was the breakdown? I don't know. I don't hear the breakdown. I want to know what.
Ultimately, I failed at both of those. And by the way, when you're that perfectionistic, it's very black or white, right? 100% is success and 99% is failure. So I ended up taking on too much.
What did the failure look like? Did you drop out of school? What did it look like?
Yeah, I basically took on too much. I tried to take classes that were too challenging. I was involved in too many committees that I was like leading. And I ended up becoming overwhelmed to the point that I needed to take an incomplete in a class and finish a paper. And that to me was terrible. And it meant that I was imperfect. And then
when people hear breakdown, they don't think an incomplete in one academic class.
I know, but I'm saying like perfectionism became this all or nothing thing. And then simultaneously, I was rejected from the sorority I really wanted to be in. And it basically, and by the way, it was a sorority I never should have wanted to be in. It was people who were nothing like I was. And again, my image in my head of who I wanted to be was something completely different than who I was. So there were sororities that wanted me, but not the ones that I believed I was worthy of. So the combination of both the social implosion and what I viewed as an academic implosion really made me break down. And I would say came close to ending my life. I developed a really severe...
Were you hospitalized? Were you hospitalized for severe depression?
I wasn't. I didn't tell it. So again, I should have been, because I carried around, a bottle of pills for a year and really many times came really close to downing them. I had worked out the exact cocktail that would stop my heart. And I developed a terrible eating disorder, to the point.
Anorexia or bulimia?
Anorexia. It was all about denial and, trying to control what I couldn't control, which was my performance, my mortality, and taking control of everything I could. And it wasn't just eating. Like I basically controlled every single thing I could control. So I believe, eating disorder is just a form of a control disorder when we try to control what we can't control. So I controlled everything. I tried to control my exercise, my money, my food. And it was a really awful time. So I ended up going abroad, thank goodness, or I wouldn't have been able to go back to school. And I basically suffered the greatest.
Like you did a semester abroad?
I did 8 months.
Okay.
So I basically,
a year.
The worst of my mental illness was in Japan. So I wasn't even, near anyone, and maybe that's a good thing. But
what was it? When you say the worst, what happened there?
I just couldn't stop exercising. I would exercise so much that when I stopped, my muscles would involuntarily twitch. I mean, it was like I had a demon. You get, when your body mass goes to a certain level, you stop controlling what you do. It was like this demon.
Right. Right. Well, your body goes into starvation mode, so it holds on to
I was
stuff.
in starvation.
So hang on one second. So let's pivot for a moment. So here you have someone who is tortured by perfection, right? Pretty much isolated, feeling very much alone, very much different, right? And you start a toy company. How did that happen?
So again, that's the incredible thing. You say, how did I start on the path to healing? When I came back from that trip to Japan, I actually met Doug.
Okay. Now he was at Duke also?
No, he was not.
Okay. You met him in North Carolina though?
No, I met him in Connecticut, where we both lived.
Oh, you had graduated then?
No, I was in the summer of my junior year.
Okay.
And our parents had known each other and had been trying to get us to meet for years. And he had a girlfriend and I had a boyfriend. And we were kind of like, we don't need our parents to introduce us. Like we could do okay on our own.
Matchmaker.
The perfectionist, right? I'm like, I don't need help. But he happened to call me that summer and we ended up going out and really liking each other. And I wanted to please, I was a pleaser.
What was it about Doug that you liked?
Oh my gosh. He had this charismatic, like magnetism that was really intoxicating, and a positivity and an optimism that I so desperately needed. So when he met me, I weighed 80 pounds. I was literally like a skeleton, a walking skeleton. And when he saw me, he said he had to like do a double take, like what is wrong with her? So we never really talked about it, interestingly, because I would deny that I had anything wrong with me. That's what the anorexic mind does. But he made it his mission to start to feed me. and he had a lot of money. He was older than I was. He was already working and had all his income, because he lived at home still, was disposable. So he would take me to these incredible restaurants, and he would point at the plate and he would say, "You're going to finish that." And I had the dual, was it my pleasing going to move me, or my anorexia? And ultimately I wanted to please him because I liked him, and I would finish what was on my plate, including like rich desserts, because I didn't want him to get angry at me.
But hang on, I know other anorexics that would do that. They do that on dates, and then they go home and they make themselves throw up.
Right. So I never was bulimic, but when I was not with him, I wouldn't eat because I was like in such trauma over the calories, but I was starting to spend more and more time with him. And so at the beginning, it actually, and what started to happen, because I was eating more than I did, which were, 20 grains of rice, I was starting to gain weight, and I was starting to feel better. So I was starting to see, because when you weigh, I couldn't even walk up a flight of stairs. Like I was so miserable. And when I started to start to feel better, something in me was like, again, that mentality started to ease a bit, that grip of the demon. And I started.
And yet the two of you to this day have never talked about that period of your life?
We talked about it, but not like Doug is a doer, not really a talker,
Okay.
which I needed so badly, because I wouldn't have been able to talk about it. And it took me like decades to be able to talk about it, because it really, the truth is, it was that nihilism. Nihilism is nothingness, where you feel that ultimately it may all be for nothing. That was the spark of all my darkness. So I couldn't talk about it. Like, it was too dark, and I was so terrified that it would kill me. Even though, ironically, I tried to end my life, and anorexia is, in effect, killing yourself slowly, torturing yourself. I wanted to, yet I desperately wanted to live too. So I had that dual, those dual competing.
Well, most of life has conflicting motions. The working mom wanting to be at work and yet wanting to be home at the same time, right? So where did the toy company come in? Whose idea was that?
Really soon.
You were still dating. You weren't married yet.
We weren't married. No, Doug always jokes that we conceived a toy company out of wedlock.
That's cute.
So out of Duke, I was also all about extrinsic, right? I had no idea who I was. I was a shell of a person who created herself to please and to be perfect. And I never went inward, because inward was so scary and so dark.
Yeah.
And I got the message that, like, this is not good. This is not something you can show to the world, this dark churning.
Right.
I wrote these verses covertly and squirreled them away, but nobody ever saw them. So out of Duke, I initially had thought I wanted to be a lawyer, because we watched Perry Mason as a kid, and I thought he was really cool and that it would be a worthy career societally. But I ended up having a panic attack while taking the LSAT and not able to finish the test, because the truth is, I'm a free-flowing, like, white space creative. I'm the last thing that should be the last person who should be a lawyer. So when I imploded that potential career, I actually ended up going what was the next most sought after career of the time, which was that consulting investment banking.
I was going to say investment banking. Yeah.
Yep. In those days, the 1980s, it was Michael Milken, it was junk bonds. It was like the heyday.
It was greed on steroids.
It was. And the position that was the most coveted in the day was the financial analyst role at the investment bank. And I went to career services the day after I imploded the LSAT. And I said,
what did you major in at Duke?
Public policy studies and Japanese language.
Okay. So are you fluent in Japanese?
I was completely.
Okay.
But
I'm just curious. Okay.
Yeah, I was. One of the reasons I wanted to live there. And I lived with a family who spoke no English intentionally, because I wanted to And I dreamed in
That's the way to
Japanese.
do it. An
It was
immersion program.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm just curious, because back then, if you didn't have a degree in finance, I can't imagine they even give you the time of day.
Well, in those days,
But you had
investment banks
Japanese.
wanted nobody who had finance backgrounds. They wanted generalists who they could train to do it their way. So actually, finance econ majors got no jobs. It was liberal arts, like generalists. They wanted history and English. So
Right. That's how Bridgewater hires now. Bridgewater in Connecticut, they hire with liberal art majors now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
up the block from you. Exactly.
They're right up the block.
Yeah.
So I think that boded well. And the fact I was fluent in Japanese was like an incredible win for them, because Japan back then was like a big trade partner.
They were buying all of New York. They were buying everything. Yeah.
Yep. So I ended up feeling a success that I hadn't felt in a long time, because I was getting all these amazing interviews. They were flying me to New York. I had learned how to please. So I had mastered the art of giving people what they wanted in an interview. And I thought of it as a chess match. And it was a really fun game to anticipate the questions and answer them perfectly, even though I didn't believe a thing I was saying. I was very good at that. And I ended up getting a whole bunch of roles. And I ended up having the luxury, for maybe the first time in my life, of choosing the very best, which in that day was Morgan Stanley.
Okay. Yeah.
They were
Morgan Stanley
ended up coming up, but back when I graduated, it was far and above Morgan Stanley. They were like the crown jewel of investment banks. So I took that role, and Doug had gotten a really amazing also role in advertising, and we were both working in New York City, and it seemed like, everything was perfect. We had the world as our oyster, and the problem was, when the role started, for me especially, it was awful. And I realized very quickly.
Well, the last place a creative should go to after law is investment banking, because there's a way to do it, and you do it this way, and there's no deviation, and they don't care.
And also, words are my muse. Words speak to me, and I can turn words into beautiful music. Numbers are just boring old numbers staring up at me at the page. And I had people around me who could turn them into beautiful stories and tell things with them and create models and I would just be in awe. Like I was in awe of them, but literally I didn't care about numbers. And slowly I started to become like a flower without sunlight and water. And I was literally feeling like I was falling into an existential meaning crisis again. And I had a hard time. I was falling into a depression. And
how long did that take before that happened?
It was immediate. Okay. I am someone who needs meaning.
So you didn't last a year?
I did last a year. I lasted about a year and a half. And there was also some cultural things there that were very demeaning. And
you mean the old bros club?
Yeah. And the joke was like, don't ever plan a vacation because it's going to be canceled. And I think the last straw for me, and by the way, it's changed a lot. That world now, it has and it hasn't. It has and it hasn't. Yeah. It's better. It is more humanizing.
It's better than it was, but that's a relative term.
It is. But Doug and I had planned this amazing trip to Mount Hood, Oregon. And we were so excited about it because I had been working so many hours, and so had he. And it got closer and closer, and everyone was like, you're not going to be going on vacation. I was like, what are you talking about? I worked so hard. I got everything ready. And it got to the week of, we were leaving on a Friday. It was Thursday. And my boss comes in and he throws this file on my desk and says, looks like it's going to be a long weekend. And I said, excuse me, actually, I know I told you like many times, like I'm going away tomorrow. My boyfriend and I, we planned this amazing trip. And he looked at me and he said, no, you're not. And I said, what do you mean? I have this trip plan. Like I've been working these, I need to get away. And he said, you are going to be working all weekend, actually, because we have the meeting on Monday morning. And I knew he left with no empathy. And I realized at that moment, I get emotional even thinking about it, that I was nothing more than a
And quite frankly, a young 22, 23-year-old today wouldn't put up with that. And they're right. And they're right not to.
I had no worth to him. He didn't see me as a person. And it was so, I said to Doug, I mean, we ended up canceling our trip. I said, but I'm leaving. Just so you know, like I'll get through this next thing and I'm out of there. And that's basically, but if I didn't have Doug really giving me the optimism that we could do something else, I might not have left, because I was such a pleaser and I was so terrified of the unknown. And I didn't even connect with my creativity. I had no idea I was creative. I never would have told a soul that I was creative, because
wait, I thought you told me you always knew you were creative. Did I misunderstand?
Now I know I was, but I never thought about it as like something I could use in life or something that was good. I always associated my creativity with awful
negativity.
Because it's constant. It's like a ticker tape running through my head. The words.
That's who you are. It's who you are.
It was always a nuisance that I wanted to rid myself of. So I wanted to be free.
So you quit the job. You quit the job.
With Doug's.
Doug is still working.
With Doug's support, sort of optimism that we could do something. We went away for a fateful weekend to this bed and breakfast in the Berkshires of Massachusetts. And we said, we're not going to come back until we figure out what we want to do that makes us want to get out of bed each day. And it very quickly centered around children, because we both love children. Our parents were all involved in education in some way. And we knew.
And you didn't have children at the time?
No, we were just dating. We had been dating for 3 years.
Okay.
So, but we knew somehow if we could impact children, not only would it make us feel a profound sense of, joy and gratitude for what we did, that it would be something that can stand the test of time, because children weren't going away. And we knew if we're going to do something and leave our mark on the world in a small way, like let it be with children. So we quickly honed in on children, and then it spanned the gamut, all kinds of ideas. But we finally sort of settled on products for children.
What was the one company it almost was?
Yeah, we wanted.
There's usually it's neck and neck, and then you make a decision.
We wanted to do a school that really, and believe it or not, it's more. I would say that
a brick and mortar school
is more important today than it ever was. We wanted to do a school that focused on what really mattered, which were life skills, and it would teach you things like how to talk with people, how to develop relationships, how to, negotiate, how to cook. It would be all the skills that you actually use in life, and focus much less on the road.
But don't schools have that in high school?
I mean, most of it is rote.
I don't know what they call it. Health.
Most of it is rote learning that doesn't have real world application. So I think we wanted it to have, real world application and make it based on problem solving and group learning and not test taking and all that.
So why'd you decide against that?
No reason really. It was just, I think maybe creating a product seemed less daunting at the moment.
Well, less capital initially too, I would think, right?
I think that's what it was, because we didn't have money. We were super poor. We pooled our meager life savings and, lived at home and really scraped by for a very long time. We ate ramen and turkey hot dogs for like 2 meals a day because we could both eat for 50 cents each.
All right. So how'd you start it? Did you get married and start it? You started it and then you got married?
And we created a product, and then we created a second product, and we pounded the pavement to sell it. And it was really hard. And it was just very.
So what do you like? People that are listening today, many of them never grew up with never not had the internet. So when you say pound the pavement, I know what you mean, but define that.
Yeah. So once we had our first product, right, we needed to sell it. And we knew that our market was toy stores, bookstores, any sort of children's stores. And we were like, how are we going to get lists of these stores, right? There's no internet. There's phone books, but they're only phone books like by your area. So we literally went to a library in Stamford, Connecticut, the Ferguson Library, and we got microfiche, which is records that are on like this this sort of plastic that you put in a reader, and we got yellow pages from phone books in every area of the country and wrote down, because we couldn't afford to take copies. Photocopies were like 25 cents each. We wrote down toy stores, bookstores, clothing stores. We had like a few categories we looked under in pretty much every major area of the US. And then we used our phone and we called them.
Oh, you didn't go knock on the door. You did cold calling.
Well, we did both. In our local area, we absolutely used our...
And I would imagine, Melissa, that back then, because I know it seems to me I remembered your toys more in the boutique local toy stores before the big stores. So I would imagine back then that would have been an easier sell because people did frequent their local bookstore, toy store.
Exactly. We did go door to door in the tri-state area to every independent, and our goal was independent. Unlike other companies whose goal is like mass and big, we knew we would be swallowed up there. We knew that our products needed the love and attention of someone who cared about them. So we went to the little stores. We convinced the owner to try us on a consignment. We knew that we couldn't even necessarily get them to pay for it because they didn't trust that it would do well. And little by little, and we'd go on the weekend and do events at the stores to try to build up the momentum for the product. And it was laborious. It was by no means glamorous. It was really hard. And we questioned what we were doing every single day. It was really, really hard. And entrepreneurship, you know, there's a glamour to it, maybe when you look at it like from a helicopter, but there's nothing glamorous about entrepreneurship.
So what was the big break for the company?
The big break for the company was when we developed a repeatable model. You know, and I think that's really, as a company, how you grow.
Well, I really meant the product order. Who ordered the product that put you on the map?
Oh, no one customer. We sold to many, many customers. I think the breakthrough just became when the product started selling and actually people wanted more. And then we were like,
was there a time when you look back and say, this is what we did, and then it was embraced?
Yeah. I mean, we created a puzzle. We created a puzzle called a fuzzy puzzle. And it was a puzzle that had texture, and it was a farm. We had two styles. We had a farm and a jungle.
I think I even know that. I think I even know that one.
Yeah, that was the first product we had that started to sell well. And we somehow got it on the cover of I think it was the lifestyle section of USA Today. Because it won some award. And our number was connected to it. And I remember we started getting like 800 calls for people who wanted to buy it. And we kind of looked at each other and we were like, oh my gosh, this is what it means to have a product that's successful. So I think we got...
I'm so struck by that because whether you are aware of it or not, your sensory skill set, if you will, is what became your breakthrough. The textile, the touch, you were so sensory sensitive. I'm just so struck that was the toy that put your head. You thought of it that way?
No, and I think in that day of our first product, I still hadn't connected yet with this ability to see products in my head. You know, that product line was just, we were talking about our favorite toys as children. We were riding in the car one day. Doug and I love to drive and drive wherever we drive. Like, we love to look at real estate. We love to look at nature. And we were driving and we were talking about our favorite books as children. And we talked about Pat the cat and Pat the bunny.
Yeah.
And somehow that ended up being, wouldn't it be cool if there were a puzzle that had texture? And then we were like, I wonder if there is a puzzle out there that has texture. You can't look on the internet. So guess what we did that same day? We drove to like 5 toy stores and we went in and we said, hi, we're looking for our kids. Do you have a puzzle that has texture on it? And everyone was like, what are you talking about? A puzzle with texture? That's our puzzle section. And by the end of the day, we were like, I think we have something here. So it wasn't I hadn't tapped into my like seeds of creativity yet. And it took a little while for that until the puzzles took off and we needed more. And it was like, what directions can we go in? And I think that was when I maybe started to sort of have that
happen.
Vision.
All right. So where are you now? I would imagine you're married. You have a couple of kids. Like, just suppose what's going on with the growth of the business with your personal life.
Yeah. So along the way, I mean, the business was so challenging. And I think in those days, everybody told us we couldn't do what we wanted to do, which was create the best designed, best quality, lowest price products that we could. And people said, you can't have all three. You can't do it. If you want high quality, you have to have high price. And we were like, no, we don't care what.
Well, honestly, Melissa, your toys are not cheap. I always found them to be on the higher end.
Well, it's interesting. In the market we were in, which was the specialty market, they were so accessible and so
in the specialty, right? If you're at the old FAO Schwartz, sure.
And we took products that were like $20 for a puzzle and brought them to $10. So we actually halved the price that was on the market at the time, because the toys we made, which were these beautiful timeless wooden toys, they were in Europe and they were inaccessible to regular people. Like, nobody could afford them. And we were really the first company that brought that caliber of toy to a reasonable price. So,
okay, so go back to where you are in your personal life now, just because for all the, the people that, okay, so her business is going great. So what's going on personally? So the business is hard. It is hard.
Yeah, no, it's hard. We're struggling. I mean, we're definitely questioning what we're doing, but in the midst of that, we did get married after dating for 6.5 years. And we were struggling. We rented a place in a woman's home and bartered for favors to get our rent low. We were living in her basement. That was kind of our life, cooking. And
children, with the children, it gets really complicated when the kids start coming. So if you've had 6, they're coming fast and furious. So you have 3 kids now. Where's the business? Like, take me to where.
We started to have kids 2 back to back, and we needed to, struggle because we couldn't afford good help and we couldn't get a lot of support from family members. I think his dad would help for like 2 hours a day, but we were selling. Like, most of our days were spent peddling the products that we created because we didn't have any employees, and then shipping them ourselves. So we were juggling. It was really hard. And I used to pretend when I would call these stores, because we wanted to pretend we were a lot bigger than we were, which is kind of sad. But my son would be in the same room as I a lot of times, and I'd be like trying to, and people would say, "Is that a baby crying?" And I'd be like, "Yeah, there's someone has a kid in our office, and they brought him in. Oh, hi, look how cute." When really, it was my own child. So we were just trying to make it.
I'll tell you a funny story, Melissa. I can remember I have 4 children. I had twins, and I had my 3rd son 2 years later, and then I had my daughter. But I can remember locking myself in the bathroom with my feet on the door so they can't barge in. And they're banging. And I'm talking to a client, and they said, "What is that noise?" I said, "Oh, there's construction going on outside." That was before you could be. That was before you were allowed to have a life.
But I will say, for the people listening, there was never a thought that I wouldn't work full time. And there has never been a day that I haven't done both.
Okay, but how have you done that? Because there's a lot that's involved with that. So what are they, for the women that are struggling, that have 2 kids, let alone 6, what do you do? Because you can't do it alone. You have to have resources.
Yeah, you do. So, I mean, I think what we realized, because we couldn't afford good help for a long time, and we had really mediocre, subpar help. And those were the worst years. I was terrified to leave the house because I didn't trust the people who were taking care of my kids. And some awful things happened. Luckily, nothing that we couldn't rectify at that point, but awful things happened because we did have people, we were right to not trust.
What's the worst thing that happened?
Someone took our kid, and we couldn't find where they went with our child, and we had to call the police, and they were leaving our child with someone like 50 miles away and going through their day and pretending they were doing what we had told them to do with our child?
You know what? As a mother of four, I totally get that. Sometimes you're just desperate. The joke is you have a pulse, you have the job.
We had people leave our kids in the bathtub at under a year and go like do stuff. And yeah, no, there were.
But the bottom line is they all survived. Yes,
they all survived.
People listening. Yeah,
but it was those days were awful because I would have to. We had one story where we had a nanny, and this is when we worked in our home pre-COVID, when you didn't work in your home, but we couldn't afford the office. So I had this office where I did sales, and I heard my son crying, and I was kind of like going like this because I saw the nanny coming toward me, holding my son like this, outward. His face was outward, like she couldn't stand him. And she walks to my office, and I'm going because I was on the phone. She opens the door, she plops him in the middle of the room, and she walks out. And I'm like, what is it? He's screaming. He's like under a year old. And I'm like, and I walked over. I was like, I'm so sorry. Someone came in with a kid. I'm trying to finish my call. And then I get off and I'm yelling for the nanny. I'm like, where are you? And then I'm like, this is a really weird thing. I go and I look in the driveway, no car, never came back.
Well, that couldn't be the worst thing. I think the worst thing was the kid being left somewhere else. If I had to pick between worse.
But I'm saying people walking, literally, it was kind of the worst thing because this person just walked out on us in the middle of the day, never came back. And like I did full-time sales. I mean, that was the only way we ate. So now I have a 10-month-old.
Well, what was Doug's role?
He did everything. He did the operations. He did the shipping. He did, so.
But I meant, but if you're doing the, if you will, the face-to-face with the customer.
On the phone. By that point, we were doing telesales.
Yes. But if he's doing shipping and all the other stuff, that seems like that might be a little bit easier to do with the baby in the middle of the room, which is not to say that it's easy.
Right. Well, I think one of the really fascinating things is our first hire, which was this amazing guy who helped us with our shipping.
Oh, hire. I thought you said fire. Hire.
Our amazing first hire. Yeah. He literally joked because when we interviewed him in our living room, we had 2 kids at the time. And he was a young guy who, and we joked, is there anything you won't do? And he said, well, I definitely won't do diapers. And he ended up doing a lot of childcare, and our kids would help him ship. This is when our nanny just like walked out on us. He would have them with him, like a 2-year-old and a 1-year-old at the time when he was shipping. So
how old was he about?
The guy who worked for us?
Yeah.
He was 21.
It sounds like he has to be young. Is he still with you today?
He just left after he had his whole career there. He married someone for Melissa and Doug. I mean, it was an amazing story. He ended up running our entire distribution center, which had hundreds of people. Like he wasn't, and we always would say, his name is Josh. We would say, like, it's the funniest story because he was like, I won't do diapers. And like a month later, like we'd have to run out and we're like, Josh, I'm so sorry. Like you have to change their diapers. And he ended up having 2 kids of his own. So it's a great story.
So yeah, what would you tell the people listening that are trying to juggle work, especially, I know during COVID, there was a woman I know that was working from her closet. I mean, it really brought up like, I say to people, women have been begging since we went into the workforce to let us work from home. And we could go on and on about that. I know there's some jobs you can't, but that's your choice. But I know plenty of attorneys that get on the train, go to their office, maybe say hello, close the door, go out to go to the bathroom. They never talk to anybody all day long. So to me, making some people, forcing them to go into the office, quite frankly, it's just every time they say culture, I say just substitute the word control. There's plenty of ways to do a culture. You can have offsite. And quite frankly, Wall Street, I don't know how much collaboration they really think is going on, how much mentorship is really still going on in the golf course, but that's a whole other conversation. But for the women that either are home and quite frankly, they're like, well, guys are like, well, you have to be working. Like, yeah, well, if people have kids at home while they're working, they have childcare for the most part. They're not trying to do both at the same time, unlike what you did, right? Like, so, but for most of the people today, the men and the women, because the men are just as involved for the most part, a lot involved. I shouldn't say just that. I'm going to get all hate emails. What's your advice? Like, what are the two most important things they need to do?
Well, I think the first is to lower your expectations and ideally have no expectations. And
of what?
Of how it is supposed
to be. That is great.
Yep, that's number one.
Right.
Because the truth is, it's messy. And I can tell you, I gave this impression that I had it all and it was all easy. It's never been easy, and it's still not easy. I mean, every day with 6 children and all their different
What are the ages of your children now?
From 15 to 29.
Okay. Now, do you still own Melissa and Doug, or did you guys sell it?
It's a great question. We own part of it, but we've sold the majority of it.
And how long ago was that?
It was about 5 years ago. And now we have a new company. We have a startup. Okay.
And what brought the sale? Like, because this was really your first baby.
It was, yeah. It's been a very emotional process, but the right process. I think, little by little, if you want to really squeeze all the juice there is to squeeze about life, or squeeze in life, you have to try different things. You have to push yourself. And I think for us, Melissa and Doug had become a really big company, 1,000 people. And it was a business. And a lot of the entrepreneurship thrill didn't exist anymore. Right? We were having to serve our biggest customers. Basically, we were beholden to Target and Walmart, which isn't bad. I mean, that's how you feed your employees. There's no negative to that. But it's a very different skill set than just feeling that boundless expanse of white space and being able to go in whatever direction you want.
So your heart wasn't there anymore.
We started to feel like it was a business that needed
a job
skills. And so we hired an amazing, management team who had expertise in scaling a business that's now multinational and has all kinds of intricacies that it didn't for the first. We were there for 32 years. So
you're just as glad you're not involved with.
Yeah, exactly. Those are the things that we aren't as good at and don't love. It's neither our skill set or our passion.
Okay, so you have on the screen, if people are seeing it, most people listen know Lifeline. So how did Lifeline get birthed?
How did it get
birthed?
Oh, how did it get birthed? It wasn't intentional. It was really through my personal journey, because as I discussed, right, I had repressed everything I was and who I was. And I didn't even know it. But as I got into middle age, I started to feel and hear that something wasn't right. It was like all that energy that I had blocked was demanding an escape and starting to demand it really loudly. And I started to feel this very odd sense of inauthenticity, that here I was creating these light bright toys that sat on a shelf and looked perfect. And the person behind them was not that at all. The person behind them was a full cauldron of emotion, most of it dark, that had channeled into making those light bright toys. And I started to feel as inauthentic as like a toy on a shelf.
So the old demons started to resurface.
Yeah, they did. They started to resurface. And I started finding myself listening to a lot of podcasts with people disclosing big secrets and reading about stories about it. And I realized now that I was trying to get the courage to do it myself, because I somehow felt that if I continued to deny my authentic self, I would die really like a sham. And
death by 1,000 cuts.
Yeah. And it was impeding me from having authentic relationships in my life. I didn't have any good friends still, because I had never really given the truth of myself. So,
well, you're raising 6 kids and you have running a big company, you only have so much.
Yeah. And in a way that was a really good mask. Like my days were full. Like I was living an amazing life and I was loving what I was doing. I mean, creating
in one dimension, right? But life is more than one dimension.
But in my creative dimension, I was literally like I could breathe for the first time when I knew I could channel that darkness into light. It was an epiphany that the darkness inside didn't have to come out as darkness. I could choose to channel it into light, bright toys. And that was such a gift. And I loved every minute of it. I actually reveled in my days and I felt my life was full. So I wasn't really seeking anything more. I thought that was it. And I was, happy, so to speak. I just hadn't ever accepted myself in totality. So I had this epiphany one day that one of the podcasts that I had loved and had been listening to, one day it was like a lightning bolt. I was like, I have to go on that podcast and share my story. And I had never done, no one even knew my story, including myself. And I was like, I have to write him and I have to go on this podcast because it was all my favorite people sharing their stories. And I somehow knew that his audience would resonate with what I had to share. And the story was that hiding behind these light, bright toys is a super intense, even nihilistic woman who thought she could never channel darkness into light. And these toys gave her the ability to do that. So,
how long ago was that? And I just want to, be respectful of the time here. How long ago was that?
That was about maybe 5 years ago, 7 years ago, 5 or 6 years ago.
Okay, so you go on the podcast. I imagine it resonates with the people. So what does Lifelines do today?
Right. So that podcast was the catalyst because I went on that podcast. I shared this truth that I have this.
Are we allowed to know whose podcast it was?
Yeah, it was called The Good Life Project with Jonathan Fields.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it was incredible once it aired because I received hundreds and hundreds of letters from people who, for the first time, made me feel seen. And they said they felt seen because what I described, which was I have an existential meaning crisis. I have these overexcitabilities. Like I have a certain personality type that is a blurse. It is a blessing in that I can create from the boundless expanse of white space and see things in my head. But it's a curse because it makes it very challenging to live in a world that doesn't accept outliers and doesn't accept neurodivergent people and thinkers. So it's both. And I received so many letters from people saying like, oh my gosh, you gave words to what I've experienced my whole life. So after I responded personally to every one of those letters and told every person I wanted to speak with them, because this was the first time that I found my people. Like I had searched my whole life for people, but the truth is people like me are hiding in the shadows. They're not the types that are like, see me, be my friend. Yeah. No, they're quiet. So I realized, oh my gosh, I'm not alone. There are a ton of people like me, and they actually are desperate to connect. They just don't know how. And that really became the impetus for Lifelines. I came out with my memoir, which I didn't do to be a bestseller. I did it to touch a few people a lot because it's super dark and really deep and has tons of my verses, which are also, dark and light. I embarked on therapy for the first time in my life because admitting I needed therapy was imperfect and I could never admit I needed help. But I finally realized that the only way I'm going to come out is to go through. And I had to touch on that nihilism and the darkness in order to be able to come out in the light. So that was a 5-year journey, 5 years of basically CBT and spirituality and a whole bunch of stuff. And then that impelled the formation of Lifelines, which was an ecosystem to support folks in being their best selves. And I call it potentializing, realizing their full potential and really going inward and discovering who they are and the full spectrum of their emotions and, all the tools that helped me to come out in the light and to be able to truly say, like, I accept myself now and I'm okay being who I am. And you ask about women, the first one is to not have expectations and not expect it to be easy. But the second one is to be honest, because I realized I had so many...
Honest with yourself.
thought, and with the world, I had so many flawed beliefs. And my belief as a mother, as a leader, as a person was, I can never show who I truly am because that's weak. And I have to put on this facade for the world that's perfect, but it's actually 180 degrees different. And if I, have to share a lesson, it's when we're honest and vulnerable and we share that we're having a hard day and our babysitter walked out on us and I'm going to have the kid bouncing him or her on a Zoom. Like, that's honest, and it's all you got some days. And the more honest we are about our truth, the more people will empathize and understand us and resonate with us. So the other thing I say is be honest. Don't feel this need to put on a persona and be someone you're not, because that's only going to get people who are not you in your life.
So two main takeaways: lower your expectations, or actually have no expectations, and be honest, which I think is the world definitely needs more. So how can people find out about Lifelines? Where should we send them to learn more about you, more about the company, more about what you offer? Unabashedly promote.
Lifelines.com has everything.
Okay.
And, we're currently creating, I wrote a second book, which is my personal practice called Practice Makes Purpose. It's really about meaning and how
it's great.
Go inward to find that sense of purpose and take care of yourself. Because again, I didn't take care of myself for so many years or believe in self-care.
Now, is Doug involved with this business as well?
He's 100% involved. So that's,
of course he is.
The biggest joys is, the journey began as my own, but as I started to see it as something bigger and something that could impact others, he was right by my side. And he has been instrumental. I'm so fortunate because I can't do a lot of things in terms of operations, and I'm not good at them and I don't enjoy them. And he loves all the things that I am terrible at. So basically I'm focusing on the creative and sort of the mission. And he's focusing on everything else, all the operations, all the hiring and finance. And he has a lot more on his plate than I do, to be honest.
I don't know about that. So one last question. What is the last book that you reread and why?
Oh my gosh. I am such an avid reader and I read constantly. So my favorite book of all time, the one that changed my life, is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl.
Viktor Frankl. Love it. And every time you read a book like that, you come away with something different. But why? Why for you? Because
his experience was so dire. He was stripped of every dignity.
And for those that aren't aware, Viktor Frankl he went on to become a renowned psychiatrist, but he was a survivor of the concentration camps. And he wrote a book, and he studied and wrote a book on who survived the concentration camps.
Yeah, his whole family was exterminated, and he was stripped of everything. I mean, he walked around naked all day and basically had to, perform menial tasks, even though he was a brilliant doctor. And he found meaning and discovered his whole philosophy of meaning called logotherapy, even in the face of suffering that was so insurmountable that it's hard to believe anyone could find a reason to live.
Yeah.
And he was the first person, when I read his book and thought, even in the face of this undeniable suffering and unavoidable fate, he still found hope and humor. Yeah. If he can do it, I have to be able to also. And that changed my life.
That is great. That is so great. It is a classic that should be read, taught in all schools. I don't know what the hell they teach today.
But interestingly, Dr. Frankl wrote 20 books, and I've read all 20. And I am a student of logotherapy now. I'm actually getting a degree in it. So that's how much he's changed my life. And one of his other books that I've read a couple times, that's even better, I think, than Man's Search for Meaning, is Yes to Life in Spite of Everything.
Great.
That isn't a life philosophy. I don't know what is.
That is great. So Melissa, thank you so much. If this is not inspiring, I don't know what is. I mean, myself as an entrepreneur, as a mother of 4, same marriage, just like you. I think that you shared so much wisdom. I've learned so much from you. I know the listeners have learned so much from you. So thank you so much. So make sure you check out lifelines.com, correct? And
yes,
learn
and
more about.
if anybody wants to email me directly, I'm melissa@lifelines.com. And I love to get letters.
Perfect. So thank you so much.